So IDEIA defines a visual impairment as something that even with correction adversely affects an individual's educational performance. So again, going back to that educational impact. So there's different layers of visual impairments. There's legally blind, which is a visual acuity of 2200 or less, functionally blind, limited vision, and low vision, which is minimal vision. And then there'll be a video that you can watch that explains this whole idea of 2020, 2200, that'll be put on Canvas for you. So I'll let you read this just to understand kind of how the eye works, because I think that helps understand some of the vision problems that we'll be looking at throughout the PowerPoint. Just looking at the different ways that the eye works and the different language that's used when we talk about vision, myopia is your nearsightedness. So this is when you cannot see things that are far away. And hyperopia is the farsightedness, when you can't see things that are close up. Astigmatism is one or more surfaces of the cornea. They're spherical but not cylindrical, which then also creates vision issues, and that may create blind spots or any of the other nearsighted or farsighted issues. When we're talking about visual impairments, there's a number of different things that could go wrong within the eye to qualify a student for a visual impairment. It could be anything from the cornea to the iris to the lens, things like glaucoma, malformations, or even cataracts. So it's not all about actually being able to see as clearly as 2020. There's a lot of other things that happen in terms of the visual fields or light sensitivity, acuity. All of those are impacted as well when we talk about visual impairments. Again, this gives you some more of the examples of issues that can happen within the eye and the different problems when we talk about blurred vision or disruptions within the light sensitivity for eyes, even going down to things like color, which can impact visual acuity and can create some visual impairments. And again, there's a link here that you can look at once you go back into Canvas for one of the processes that happens within the eye for some of our children who may qualify for visual impairments. When you look at the history of visual impairments, the first school for the blind started back in the 1700s in Paris. Throughout time, we have been pretty progressive when it comes to working with children who are blind. The Braille system was created in the 1800s, and schools for the blind have been opened since the 1800s as well. So we've had a lot of services for a very long time for these particular groups of students. In the 1970s, IDEA required specialized services within the public school classroom, so students were able to be in that least restrictive environment starting in the 1970s instead of having to go to specialized schools. Again, when we're talking about visual impairments, we're talking about a low incidence disability. We're looking at about 2.8% of all children who are school age who require some sort of special education services. So again, remember that there needs to be some sort of educational impact, which there almost always will be, but that's how we're measuring that by students who actually qualify for the disability area. Some students who have visual impairments, it's very clear-cut. They know very early on, but other students who may have some sort of degenerative disease or problems going on, it may start slowly. So on the list on the screen are some of the behavioral characteristics that you may see in students who are experiencing some vision problems. I know schools frequently go through and do vision tests, but oftentimes it may take a specialist to really dig in a little bit deeper to figure out exactly what's going on. But if you see a student who's demonstrating a number of these characteristics, it might be time to mention to the parents, I'm noticing these things. When's the last time that maybe they had their eyes checked, or has their doctor ever mentioned anything about their vision? The way that we assess individuals with visual impairments is first with that very old-fashioned Snellen chart. Remember those charts where you have to stand back and point up or side, to the left, to the right, or down, and you're reading those charts. So that's the very first layer. And then you get into more functional vision, which is literacy, actually reading text, and then learning media, whether or not you can see information on different types of screens, papers, those sorts of things, and then moving into larger prints and then different levels of Braille. So you can get an assessment of where the student is in terms of their ability to see the information and understand the information, giving their modality of understanding when it comes to the print that they can see. There's also a clip here about reading Braille that you can click on in Canvas. Just a quick example of a Braille card, which you'll be able to see in the video as well. So this may surprise you, but students who have visual impairments are predominantly in the regular education classroom. They also receive services in a resource room and a separate class, and then you do see a pretty large percentage in separate schools and residential facilities, and that really, I think that this is a good representation of the severity of the visual impairment as well, because as students need more services, oftentimes they need a more restrictive environment in order to access those types of services. When thinking about what students might need if they're in your classroom and they have a visual impairment, they may need things like magnifying glasses, word processing programs, talking clocks, tactile globes or maps, large print books, bold lined writing paper. So all these are examples of modifications, or rather accommodations, not modifications, that a student may need in order to access the curriculum. Again, this gives you some things to think about as a teacher with students who have visual impairments, everything from lighting to the color and contrast of the information that you're giving the student, size and distance of the print, as well as where they are in relationship to the print, and time to complete task, particularly when you are giving them a lot of visual information. As you can imagine, early intervention is also important when we're talking about visual impairments, and oftentimes a family will be part of an individualized family service plan where they're getting some wraparound services so that they can work with occupational therapist or speech therapist working on that fine and gross motor development, receptive and expressive language. And oftentimes these students also need to work on self-help and daily living because they are navigating through an environment that they may not be comfortable moving through and may need additional supports and services in order to be successful. Moving into transition planning, as students with visual impairments move into high school age and adulthood, we're looking at potentially vocational training, but not always, or post-secondary educational opportunities. Looking at traveling and using community resources becomes really important. How students can maintain mobility within their community on an independent level. So how will they access either transportation, or what will they do in order to successfully get to work or get to where they need to be, and really teaching these students a level of independence so that they can live on their own and be successful within their employment and socially as well. From a diversity standpoint, a couple things are kind of important to point out. One being that within certain cultures, there may be susceptibilities to eye diseases, where you may see certain cultures, a specific gender. Some things may be hereditary, or there may be genetic roots. So you may see a prevalence of certain types of eye diseases within certain subgroups. You have to also remember that socioeconomic status may impact whether or not a child is able to even get an evaluation to see if there are issues going on. And everything from being able to see, the board, to things that we were talking about before with acuity, blind spots, those types of things that need more of a specialist to evaluate as opposed to the school nurse or, the local health center. So that may be a factor. The last thing is that within all disabilities, not just blindness, but all disabilities, there may be cultural implications. So again, within some cultures, it's not okay to be blind. It's not okay to have a child who is blind. So, that must be taken into consideration. Or maybe in some cultures that having a child who's blind means that you always take care of them for the rest of their lives and you don't teach them how to be independent, because that's just not the expectation. So it's important to understand, no matter what the culture, that you have an understanding of what the expectations are for that child, from their parents and within the culture as a whole. So through IDEA, Braille instruction is required unless the team decides that it is not appropriate, but otherwise it is a requirement. And assistive technology is oftentimes very beneficial, as well as other ways to engage the students within literacy. So if we're talking about a student who has visual impairments, we may be, subscribing to books on tape, or making sure that we have access to the novels that the high schoolers are reading in Braille. So we need to make sure that we're bridging those two things together. And last, when we're talking about technology and some of the accessibility options for students with visual impairment, you can see a couple of the different devices that are listed here. And there's a lot of different screening softwares, magnifiers that, put it up on a video monitor for students, or can take a text file and then format it for different types of printing, or for completing it in Braille. So there's a lot of options out there. I think the biggest problem is actually getting access to it in a public school system.